All right. Well, welcome again, and I really appreciate everyone joining. This is one of our monthly master classes that we like to host on a number of principles that we know lead to developing an exceptional high-performing team and team culture. And this month's focus is on a topic that often happens within organizations everywhere. It's kind of one of the ones that really doesn't get much attention in the conversations when it comes to our teams and cultures. And this is the intolerable behaviors and how do we confront tolerable behaviors as a team. This is actually part of a two-part masterclass because we just understood that there's so much to unpack here. It's not something that we thought we could just jam into 1 hour. So we're actually breaking it into two parts. But we wanted to bring this masterclass up to our community because we understand that in today's work climate and the environment that we're operating in today and the major changes in the way that work happens, whether that's virtual, hybrid, or in person, or a mix of all of those different worlds, this can make connecting and collaborating and performing at a high level within our teams extremely difficult to do. So even the strongest leaders that are out there today that maybe have been doing it forever have now been forced to reinvent and relook at how do our teams work well together within this new work environment. And unfortunately, a lot of leaders still operate behind this belief that it kind of happens by chance. It just happens organically, and there's not really much intention that needs to go behind it. And it just happens because we have the right people from the get-go. But that could not be further from the truth. We know that great teams and exceptional teams are really created with intention. And this is probably why you're joining us today. You're probably hoping, okay, as a leader, how can I be more intentional with my team and the people that I work with? And how can I hopefully walk away from this masterclass to start that journey into performing at a higher level together, achieve greater things together, and if anything, collectively grow together within your respective teams. So that's what we're all about and what we're going to focus on today. And for introduction purposes, my name is Zech. My personal purpose has always been around connecting humans together at a deeper level and unlocking greater levels of collective impact. I've always loved to support others in developing deeper relationships with each other. And then how do we actually take that bond and that relationship and create an environment around us that empowers us to collectively work together and do something that we couldn't quite do alone, right? And that's what I really love about working with teams, because teams provide that space where amazing things can happen. It provides our opportunities to create and accomplish things that we couldn't do by ourselves. So that's why I've loved this work and working on culture and some of these interpersonal dynamics that we're all focused on within here at Virtuosity. So if you're not familiar with us as a company and as a team, this is really our own amazing team that supports leaders and organizations in transforming, these messy teams into exceptional teams. And at its highest level, we do that by creating the conditions in which teams can grow and thrive. And this is really driven from our 20 years in research in behavior change and frameworks and trainings in the interpersonal dynamics that can help leaders and team members apply within their respective units and apply different influence methods that really lead to these cohesive, safe, strong, and highly successful teams. So we're really excited to share some of these things with you today for our agenda, just what to expect in our session for the next, about 40 minutes here. We're going to go through a couple quick questions, maybe get a little heat check on how the team feels on some of these principles, but the bulk of our time will be spent on the key principle, achieving collective alignment, but more specifically, the concept of intolerables and the intolerable behavior. And then we will close out this session with some actionable strategies that you can take right away so you can start to continue your own journey within your own respective teams and companies. So, as you see here, I'd love just to do a quick survey, get a quick check of the room, just some ideas around how this concept feels to you personally or within your own respective company and teams. I'll launch this poll. You should see this pop up on your screen here. No prep needed for this, but think about what feels most relevant to your own team. Is it we've identified behaviors that are disruptive and distracting to our team, and we actually have practices to manage them? What about we've identified these, but they keep happening. We don't have a process. Or maybe the third option is like, what are these? What are intolerables? I don't even know what they are. There's no process. We haven't identified them. That's where we are today. So think about your company. Where do we rank on these three options? And we'll see how our group's doing. So we got most of us voting so far. All right. So this is actually pretty good. Let me end the poll here. We'll share the results. Should be able to see those. So we have two out of a couple of us really voting on. We actually have processes in place to manage them, which is great to see. Few in the middle where, they keep happening. We know what's right, what's wrong, but they continue to happen. And some of us are at the what are intolerable stage. So this is excellent. This is what we're here to explore today. Let me stop sharing that. Close that poll. That's a great kind of intro to everything that we're really here to talk about. For some background and context, so we found these stats to be incredibly powerful and really why it's so important to develop an environment to be exceptional. There's obvious ROI in taking dysfunctional teams to a good team, but there's even evidence now that we can take even more growth from taking a team good to great, such as some of the research from Gallup that found highly engaged teams are up to 21% more profitable. On the other side, companies that collaborate are 30% more innovative and at least 36% more productive than those who don't. So when we think about that collaboration feature, when we get into some of the messy stuff of toxic or intolerable behaviors, those are the things that prohibit collaboration from happening in most cases. So the business case is there. But you're probably wondering by now, how can I unlock these own capabilities within my own respective teams? And that really starts with one of the key elements that we're focused on, which is collective alignment. And just to kind of set this foundation on what that is, collective alignment is this artful balance between individuality and the collective we. So it's the alignment that can be achieved when we understand the group norms, we understand the agreed to behaviors and the processes that we're going to operate behind and agree to and fully understand so we can align and work collectively towards a shared goal. But to achieve that collective alignment, there's a few core elements within this world. One of them being team purpose. This is kind of the why behind the team's existence. Goal alignment. So one of my sayings that I've always referenced is what gets measured matters. So we need to be careful about what we measure and why. This also builds off of the team purpose, which if you attended one of our master classes in the past, we really centered around team purpose before. Shared consequences. This is about creating this culture of shared fate or this sense of shared fate that we're in this together. Focus on others because what affects one affects all is the next element. And the last one, which is really our focus for today and today's masterclass, is intolerables. So let's really dig into that. That's why we're here. What are intolerables? Well, first, I think we can quickly reflect on this scenario that we've all experienced, because I think this can really set the stage on the power of intolerables, where they come from and where they often show up. What I think we all know those experiences where a high-performing employee with a track record of maybe toxic or hurtful actions just continues and carries on and is typically unchecked, mainly because the leader or the team thinks that they can't afford to lose this person's contribution because they might be contributing in a certain way because they have a certain skill set, but they're still providing these certain toxic behaviors and it impacts the rest of the unit. But as hard as that can be for a leader to confront this disruptive leader, this is something that greatly disrupts the rest of the team in terms of the quality, the integrity, and the trust, the safety, and the performance as a collective. So those behaviors that carry on have a greater impact in the negative way to the rest of the team and the culture. So that's what we're really here to talk about today, and something that we should be clear on as well, is it's important to distinguish intolerable behaviors from those of some of those HR and compliance focus items that are generally included in the employee handbook. They're kind of widely shared because of organizations all over are constantly, having different legal action issues in the news and within articles. So things that we typically understand, like sexual harassment or stealing intellectual property, right? Like we all know those things are not tolerated. These behaviors that we're talking about today are kind of the things that get held beneath the surface. They typically go unchecked. We typically do not clarify them and have conversations about them because, quite frankly, they're pretty uncomfortable to talk about, and they require this sense of trust and connection to be able to talk about them. So if you have a lot of intolerable behaviors, things that disrupt the quality, integrity, and trust and safety of the team, it adds an amplification effect of being even harder to talk about them and impact them. So hopefully by the end of today, we can really start to gear you up to have that conversation. But allowing, and I just want to kind of add some stories here and reaffirm the negative impact that bad behaviors can have on an organization. It can have an exceeding impact on the bottom line, right? Like workplace performance just continues to drop. These conditions will compel good employees typically to look for greener pastures and other areas to gain employment, while the bad actors, the people that demonstrate the toxic behaviors, they're the ones that tend to stick around within the organization. So it kind of amplifies it even further there. We also found from a culture standpoint, the company does become like this revolving door for workers, right? It'll become more and more difficult to attract and retain top talent, because those are the ones that can typically find a mentally healthier and more attractive work environment. And it's clear the way people are leaving jobs in record numbers right now with this whole great resignation or whatever other term you want to tie to it. People are seriously unwilling to settle for jobs that demonstrate these behaviors. So exceptional teams and exceptional organizations and cultures understand that it's critical to understand and clarify what intolerable behaviors are and a process to eliminate them and acknowledge and work through them as a team. One of these situations that I did want to share, I remember hearing this story, and I don't know if there's anyone on the call that are big fans of Sears, the store. I'm not here to kind of dictate where you shop or don't shop, but maybe this story will change your perception. But I think this is just a really good example of what type of toxic behaviors from a leader especially can have from an impact perspective on the bottom line. So this story is really centered around Eddie Lampert, who is the CEO of Sears. Before he was the Sears chairman and CEO, he was actually I think he still is, like this billionaire hedge fund manager. And he really made his fortune from this like ruthless competitive nature. And he had this belief that people perform best that when they are acting from their own self-interest. And in 2008, he took over Sears, and he brought that belief system and that type of behavior into his management strategy for the organization. So he really created this like warring tribal type ecosystem within the company, setting each business unit against each other with the belief that competing for resources and attention would drive profit for the business as a whole. Well, when the businesses did come together for these like larger town hall meetings, employees would present their work to each other and to Lampert. And rather than using these as opportunities to share information and collaborate and get on the same page and get aligned on specific goals, Lampert used these sessions as a time to find flaws and holes within each other's work. And they would actually call people out in front of everyone on stage at these town halls. And they're almost like these very like heated situations. And he even was quoted that like, if I scar or shame employees, it would lead to better performance, right? Which is just wild to think about. And there has been even tons of reports from employees who report these as like fairly traumatic experiences. Like literally they had to take time off and leave the workforce because of those type of experiences. But to think about the long-term impact from, behaving in a certain way, Sears has seriously became a place where each unit focuses only on themselves. They sacrifice their own benefits for the greater good of the company, and cooperation and collaboration is non-existent. If anything, it's impossible. And since Lampert took the role of CEO, the company sales has dropped nearly $10 billion within that time frame. So you think about, instead of investing in actually enhancing workplace culture, Lamper really focused on pushing this toxic competitive concepts into the operation. And now we're at a space where literally people are running out the door. No one wants to work there and even shop there anymore from a sales perspective. So this is really like, this is a massive example of what toxic behavior can have on the impact of an organization and the people and the bottom line. But this happens all the time when leaders get promoted into new roles, or leaders lead their business units and they take in certain toxic behaviors into that culture, and it leads to some long-term really negative impacts for the company. So now that we understand the impact of allowing intolerable behaviors and what that can cause, let's start to understand what is the criteria for intolerables. How do we start to identify them? How do we start to have the conversations around them as well within our respective teams? We started to consider and look at some of our own research that intolerable behavior or action is anything that can cause one or more of the following things that you'll see on the screen here. One of them being, it hinders the team ability to meet its objectives. So we have our certain goals, type of behavior that hinders that. Damages the harmony and unity of the team. So thinking about the shared fate elements and how we are connected, and is it more of a collaborative or a competitive type behavior? And the third one being having an adverse impact on one or more individuals within the team. So we'll get into some more examples of things that can like make an impact on these 3 bullet points. But these are the 3 key criteria to keep in mind when reflecting on your own team behavior. And as I go through some of the next examples of how these things show up and what we could start to do to have the conversation, I want you to even reflect on your own team experience in the last week, in your check-ins, in your team meetings, in town hall experiences, the last month. Like really reflect on, how has my team been showing up, and are any of these things starting to kind of showcase themselves that I might be able to kind of see like, okay, maybe we do have some toxic behaviors that are alive within our unit. So because that is really the challenge, is there's so many different ways intolerables show up, and it can really manifest through the thoughtless work habits that we just live and operate behind, such as this like chronic lateness to meetings or ignoring commitments when we make them. And it can even crop up in almost harmless, seemingly harmless ways, like gossiping between members of a team. What the challenge is, once they do happen though, is a lot of employees will even start to mimic other poor behaviors because they want to fit in, or others will end up becoming defensive and hostile and maybe retreat to their own silos because of this like feeling of shame, or people will remain quiet and staying in this almost like miserable state because of the fact that they might be bullied. And that's another good example where bullying can often persist without technically breaking some of those HR policies that we kind of referenced before. That could be like this persistent, offensive, abusive, or intimidating or insulting behavior that people demonstrate to each other, or it might be directed to an individual specifically within the team, where these recipients will feel almost threatened or abused or humiliated. So you can see this in ways such as like verbal abuse, things like being shouted out, isolation, if there's certain threats being shared, like being threatened at job loss or being excluded from certain meetings. Like these are all kind of examples of how bullying could show up within your company. Some other toxic or intolerable cultures that tend to develop because of these type of behaviors include the classic hustle culture. I think this is one of the most normalized cultures in the workplace today. And this usually comes from this like sense of being micromanagement and that operating at the core, and people working long hours of the day, and leaders demanding responses to emails late at night type thing. Blame culture, or everyone for themselves type culture. That's another common toxic environment where this is kind of like the establishment that mistakes are bad and they're unwelcome. And if you put yourself out there and take risks and fail, we are not accepting of that type of energy within our team. So that way, like, nobody ends up maybe taking responsibility for things, or they don't put themselves out there or speak up because they have this fear of losing their job or looking bad within their team. Click culture is another good example where this is obviously like the opposite of an inclusive culture. This is where we start to create an environment where people are not comfortable being their authentic selves with the peers around them. And another kind of final common culture that we often see is this fear-based culture, where people are silenced by intimidation or abuse or gaslighting, and being dominated over meetings, and having that where you work with a manager that's kind of like always checking in. And this is where I remember working for a sales leader, even, where our one-on-ones were always centered around metrics and what's the heat map and how many meetings do you have and all these certain things. And it was always kind of this intimidation of you're step below where you need to be. It created this very strong fear-based culture within the organization. So I've been talking a lot, but I want you to start to reflect on these environments of toxic cultures. And you probably can think of your own examples that you've gone through. And one of the things that we often reflect on, especially when we're in these situations of like, what type of emotion do you feel or do you experience when you're in these situations, or when you experience an intolerable behavior? So one thing I want you to do is you can either scan that QR code on the screen, or I will add this link in the chat. And I want to see, as a collective, let's just reflect on the situation. We're in a toxic environment. We're in a situation where there's intolerable behaviors in play. How do you sense yourself feeling when you experience these behaviors? What type of environment has that created for you? Maybe it's similar to the fear-based culture, or this feeling of being left out, or being intimidated or gaslighted. What is that for you? So I'll give you a second. Awesome, Rita. Frustrated, discouraged, isolated. I'll add those to the word cloud for you too. Those are, I can resonate with that. Give you another second to maybe put in a couple options in there. I can tell you what, I remember when I worked in some of these organizations, it definitely didn't make me want to come into work that morning. You know, it definitely didn't make me feel like I wanted to show up and contribute to this organization that day. So you think about how often that's showing up within your teams if these toxic behaviors are allowed to continuously happen. Frustrated, sitting at the center here. Withdrawal, angry, isolated, demotivated, right? Mistrust, withdrawal, high blood pressure, right? From a wellness perspective, we think about burnout, mental health. Physically, toxic work environments can shift our body in a way that creates an unhealthy life. High blood pressure being one of them. Absolutely. Wow, this is great. Okay. Let's keep moving. These are great contributions. Hopefully I'm not making you revisit any traumatic experiences here, reflecting on the feelings. But really, just to set the stage, I mean, I would even, part of the solution that we'll get into a little bit later is reflecting on how these things show up within your teams, getting a better understanding and clarity on how does this make your people feel. And then how do we start to shift our attention to a much more positive work environment and shared agreed upon behaviors that will allow us to thrive into the future. So let me continue here. All right. So the question now becomes, how do we actually identify what are the intolerable behaviors within our own respective team? There's obviously probably some, assumed behaviors that we do not want to operate behind. But the challenge is for a lot of teams is they most likely have not actually had this conversation before. And engaging in these conversations about appropriate workplace behaviors kind of depends on an organization's actual understanding of the behaviors themselves. Like, have we actually talked about them, had the conversation, and clarified the values that we have and how that connects to specific behaviors that we see and will live behind every single day. And a best practice to start this clarification is really holding space to understand the differences between intolerable behaviors and annoyances, for example. And this can actually be a really fun experience for the team. It doesn't have to be this negative finger pointing exercise or experience, but it can actually be something that your team bonds over and connects over and has this fun conversation around. If you've seen the show, for example, The Office, there's been probably many examples in these two different behaviors in every episode, whether that's from Michael Scott or Dwight or any of the other characters in the show, where they're kind of doing these very, comments on annoyances, like what's your coffee breath problem here? Or there's also a lot of examples of just unacceptable behaviors that are continued to happen, especially even when Michael goes into the warehouse or something and he tries to move some boxes on stuff like that. But our team at Even Virtuosity, we actually referenced The Office quite a bit, and we actually conducted a conversation on how this show starts to present certain behaviors, and what do we see as annoyances, and what we see as unacceptable or intolerable behaviors. And we used it almost as a stepping stone into a deeper conversation around this concept. And here's an actual example of the brainstorm we used on our own team to complete this. So we thought about all the different behaviors that can seem to annoy or be toxic and categorized them between these two different worlds. And this naturally creates this sense of empathy between us and this understanding of our teammates, because now I have a deep and clear understanding of what my peers' annoyances are, and as a unit, what we agree to, what will not be tolerated when working together. Like, how would I ever know that there is this deep annoyance that I have of people chewing with their mouth open and having that fun conversation with my peers, but then how that starts to build into other intolerable behaviors as well. So again, this is a really great team building experience. And this is almost like something that we can laugh around and have a conversation around, but then have agreements on how we will not behave. And it's also another way to start seeing how these annoyances can almost start as a precursor to a deeper, more impactful and tolerable. They can almost start to act as indicators or signals to something deeper that's impacting the team and the organization. So it's really important to the difference between them and these two worlds, but also the relationships between them, and how, why is it that X, Y, and Z are always being annoyed with this situation? Maybe there's actually something deeper here that is beneath the surface that me as a leader, I'm not totally aware of, and we might need to have a conversation around in order for our team to operate and behave at its highest level. So the solution in terms of what we want you to start doing to begin your own journey in solving this element within your team's culture is to first remove the power of them by naming them and defining them. And then after that, we can also start to create a process to hold each other accountable to them. So it's kind of like a two-step process here to really create this like team environment and this conversation within your respective teams. And we're actually going to send you a worksheet in a follow-up email to kind of begin this journey. But you can really start with encouraging an open dialogue around this concept. And it's really important to not make any assumptions around what you think is intolerable and what's an annoyance, even though we can assume that, bullying, for example, is something that we shouldn't tolerate. But it's also, to get to the source of the truth, we need to create this safe environment where employees kind of feel safe enough to talk about these things. And you can't make any promises of safety until you really understand what's going on. So you can't assume people you care or you'll listen or people will take you seriously until you start to kind of have these conversations where you can help them through whatever this is. So the practice is, again, let's create a space where this is actually opportunity for teams to bond and connect and build deeper relationships with each other. Almost have fun with it. Don't make it this finger pointing experience where, we're going, hey, this leader continues to, and they're the problem, but more of a team building and connection exercise and talk through some of these things. And that can allow you to really transform into deeper conversations about how we work best together and what behaviors really limit our potential. So some of the questions that you can start to ask here are, what are the behaviors do we feel would hinder our team's ability to meet its objectives? Or what behaviors do we see and sense damages our harmony and our unity of our team and our ability to communicate and work with each other and build trust with each other? Or what behaviors do we feel has an adverse impact on us as an individual within this respective team? Maybe there's certain things where, for some reason, we're leaving Zach out of the meetings every week because we didn't feel he needs to be part of it, but it kind of has this adverse impact on my capability to make an impact because I'm being left out of key communications, right? So this can be having this conversation around these 3 questions and some of the things in the worksheet that you'll receive afterwards can be an extremely strong team building and bonding experience. And this can really get you further down the road on your way to being an exceptional team. I will make a quick note here as well, though, just to reflect on the fact that this is still a very vulnerable and emotional conversation. And it can be really easy to fall into the trap of finger pointing and blaming and reflecting on previous experiences that someone may have had within the team. So it is really important to be a good facilitator of this conversation. So as a leader, think about if you're going to take the lead on facilitating this workshop or this dialogue, how are you holding the space and creating that environment for people to feel safe and to speak up? How are you facilitating it around core values where people are not going into the shouting game and you're actually having a constructive and progressive conversation around this concept? And if you are a leader that maybe has been demonstrating toxic behaviors, even though we might not always want to say that we are, or maybe you're part of a team that inhibits a lot of toxic behavior, it can be really important and to have an external facilitator for these things too, and have an external almost mediator to kind of hold the space. And that way there's maybe not that power dynamic between leader and team member within the room. And we're almost creating this space of equals and connection and so forth. So I will note when going about this team building activity, just kind of reflect on that a little bit before you just kind of throw it out there and jump in. So next steps then, I want to share with you that we've started to name our intolerables and we started to define them through that type of activity. It's essential that we then create a process to hold each other accountable to them, right? It's like one thing, same way with our core values when we're creating theirs, it's one thing just to put them on the wall, but it's important that we actually create a process and start to clarify the behaviors to hold each other accountable to demonstrate in this way of operating, communicating, and working together. One of the most important parts of this entire experience is people want to feel heard, people want to feel seen, and they want to feel respected. So when we create a process through working through these behaviors when they happen, we need to create an environment where the team who experiences the toxic behavior and the people demonstrating the behavior feel heard, seen, and respected as well. So that is the process that you can start to take in these situations. These situations are almost more important than the outcomes themselves. So we always have things to fight about in these environments. There's always conflict arising. That's not the point. It's not about creating this like cancel culture, but it's more about creating a culture where teams can actually start to work together through these challenging situations and these conversations and do it in a way in which we win collectively together. So that's why we need to win at the process. And that's really what part 2 is going to be all about. I'm going to add this link in the chat for you as well, to go ahead and RSVP for part 2, because obviously part 1 is centered around identifying and, clarifying what are the intolerables and having that conversation. So we want you to focus on that over the next few weeks. And then coming August 31st, we're going to talk more about the process. And let's say these intolerable behaviors happen, how do you actually start to kind of work through that in a way that sets you up in a better place after they happen, right? So one of the things that we're also including, just to kind of let you know, part of the registration of this next session, because we know this is a very vulnerable and kind of complex kind of subject to work through at times, part of registration will include a free consultation call, a free strategy call to review this practice, review how it's impacting your team. We can even review part 1 of this session, so you can workshop through that as well and complete that with your own team. And then we can start to position and talk about how part 2 can be used for your own process. One of the things that I'll do to kind of wrap up and close out this session, and we'll probably put 10 or 15 minutes back into your day, but one of the things that you can look out for is review your email for the free framework to kind of work on that with yourself and your own team. And we encourage you again to co-create it and hold the space and facilitate that conversation as a unit. Another thing that we do offer for free as well, which will be in the follow-up email, is our 5Q assessment. As noted at the very beginning, there's a number of key elements that result in really creating an exceptional team, such as collective alignment being one of them. This is really a free way to find out where you stand today and where you might want to start working on to pinpoint where you're going to have the biggest impact. And then obviously we can schedule time to kind of review those results, have a free strategy session and start talking through different recommendations. I will say, if you are in a space to take things to like a deeper level and really start to make an impact and take things to its exceptional level, we encourage you to check out our exceptional team training program. This is a highly interactive training and program that we take individuals and teams through to grow to their full potential. It is for team leaders and teams of any size. So it's a great way to instantly improve collaboration and some of those interpersonal dynamics to lead to being exceptional. So we teach you a number of key skill sets and practices that empower you to have effective communication with each other, have some of these courageous conversations like working through intolerables, tackling tough issues or delivering bad news as a couple of examples. So by the end of it, you have really positioned yourself to be in a place where you've designed the conditions that improve team performance and deliver some of those winning and sustainable business outcomes that we're all really working through as a company. And this is all based off of our research and some of our experience working with companies all over the world at this point. So we've worked with companies in the United States, in the UK, and even teams that operate across international cultural borders like South and East Africa. So we know that these principles and practices apply to all teams and cultures and types of companies across the world. These are the human things that we have to really operate behind within companies everywhere. So I will close with this, and then we'll open it up for any questions. Otherwise, we can add some time back into your day, which I know we can all appreciate. One of my favorite quotes is from this book, Reinventing Organizations. When organizations are built not on implicit mechanisms of fear, but on structures and practices that breed trust and responsibility, extraordinary and unexpected things start to happen. And I truly have seen that within the teams we've worked with. This grows on our ability to understand and work through these toxic and intolerable behaviors. So we can really get beyond that, get beyond the mechanisms of fear. We can truly become exceptional and extraordinary as a team. So if you need help with this, obviously schedule time with us today. But overall, thank you so much for joining us. This concludes some of the key concepts of identifying and defining our intolerable behaviors, I will pause it if there's any questions that we can help answer. Otherwise, we appreciate everyone joining for today's masterclass. Any questions, feel free to unmute or type them in the chat. Awesome. Thank you, Anne. Perfect. Well, look out for the recording, look out for the worksheet and the follow-up email. We'll be sending that out sometime today or tomorrow morning, and reach out if we can help you in your journeys to becoming exceptional. Have a great rest of your afternoon.